Okay, we're picking up on page 39, right at the top. So this is still the chapter Doubts and Questions. Particularly, it's the doubts and questions of Prefect Hui, or it could be the doubts and question of many people, but Prefect Hui is the one who's asking the questions. And I can assume by, if you look at the answer, he's obviously addressing the whole assembly that's gathered there. And the reason why these doubts or questions might arise for them is because he's hitting on or asking about two of the primary, I guess you'd say, Buddhist practice or activities of both lay people and left-home people. The first one, the lay people, is the giving, the dana, giving of offerings specifically. Although in Buddhism, people who have left home, become monastics, also practice giving. It's one of the 6 paramitas. And so there's levels of giving. There's obviously the giving of material things, but there's also the giving of the teachings. There's a giving of an example or an embodiment, and cultivating according to the teaching. So in the, if you want to say the hierarchy of giving, the most simple and easiest to do is material things. To people in need, to the monastic community of bedding, food, clothing, medicine, the essentials. But then actually the giving goes up as you have less. This is seemingly a paradox. In other words, one who becomes a monastic and has given up material possessions for the most part outside the essentials would seem to have not much to give in that sense. But in what happens then is the exhortation to give becomes more deep and interior, that you give the teachings, you lecture them, you explain them, you translate them, you make them available, you interpret them, you illustrate them, you sing songs about them, you put on plays about it. There's just no end to what you can do to illustrate the teachings. But the text then goes on, this is from the Avatamsaka, the highest giving is a gift of Dharma. And then in the gift of Dharma, the highest gift is not necessarily the lecturing or display of it, but also, maybe even more importantly, the embodiment of it. So to cultivate according to the teachings is considered the highest gift of Dharma. And then to embody it actually so that you become one with the teachings in your body, mouth, and mind, even in the most subtle aspects of your behavior and demeanor. This is considered the highest gift. So that being said, here the prefect is asking, he's asked about the first or second levels of giving, which is giving material things that benefit Buddhism. Now the second question he asked, which is one of the, and remains one of the doors of practice that's quite universally throughout the Buddhist world, is what's called the Pure Land Dharma door, or Pure Land recitation, or the Pure Land school. It's a whole body of teachings devoted to this practice of the Pure Land. But what is that exactly? He's going to make clear in these couple pages that we're going to get into now, and it's probably not what a lot of people think it is. And so here we have an issue. Is he contradicting the teachings in presenting what he's presenting here? We'll get into what he's presenting, but I think you'll find it a little bit disconcerting how he presents it. Or is he making a case without stating it explicitly that the teachings have been misinterpreted and he's realigning them? I'm leaning towards the latter because I was not exposed to Pure Land practice through the traditional lay Asian community. I got my exposure to Pure Land practice in my relationship to my teacher and then the Pure Land texts themselves. And so I must say, when I can explain a little bit of what happened in that training, but it was heavy duty. It wasn't just, like reciting the Buddha's name, Namo Mitopo, Namo Mitopo, Namo Mitopo, but even really sincerely, Namo Mitopo. It was deep, transformative self-cultivation that was going on in the mind ground, and using that Dharma door for that. So once I got that exposure to that, and after a couple of years, I traveled with my teacher to Asia, and I was completely shocked to see how it was being used and interpreted there, outside of this context that I had been exposed to. Then the question was, which was the more definitive or the more accurate? And this is something probably you'll all have to decide for yourself, but the passage that you're getting tonight is the one that's more in line with my exposure to Pure Land practice, or Pure Land teaching, Pure Land cultivation. And so I suspect that Prefect Wei is asking his question as Pure Land practice has come to be conventionalized at that time, and in some ways continues to be explained to people as seemingly a devotional practice. Sometimes people use the word bhakti, a devotional practice invoking the aid or the power or the assistance of an external being called Amitabha Buddha, other power. And so what you're doing is basically beseeching, praying, invoking this aid or help to come and aid and rescue you, and ultimately to take you off to be reborn in this Pure Land that this Buddha has established. And that's usually how it's presented. Now let's get into what the Sixth Patriarch is saying about that, and starting at the top, and we'll just read it. This goes on, so I think we're not going to cover the whole thing tonight, but we'll get into it pretty deeply. So it starts, the prefect further asked, quote, "Your disciple often sees the Sangha and laity reciting Amitabha Buddha, hoping to be born in the West in the Pure Land. Please explain this for me. Will they actually gain rebirth there? Please resolve my doubts." And the master then says, "Prefect, listen carefully, I will explain it for you. When the world-honored one was in the city of Shravasti, he taught about the Western Pure Land as an inducement to practice. The text of the sutra clearly states, quote, 'It is not far from here,' unquote. In discussing this, it might appear that it is 108,000 miles away, but it just means that the 10 evils and 8 wrongs are right within ourselves. Describing it as distant is meant for those with limited capacity. Saying it is nearby is for those with greater ability." Okay, this is very rich, and every time I read it, I see layers that I hadn't seen before. The first thing I notice is in the very nature of the question. I was explaining last week, perhaps, or I do this. I don't remember what I say anymore, so. Traditionally, the Dharma is presented as a therapeutic, liberative technique, or series of techniques. Liberative techniques. Parallel or metaphor, it's medicine that's meant to cure specific illnesses. It has no purpose whatsoever outside of that liberating ability or potency or curing of our greed, anger, stupidity, delusion, and so forth. Once it's served its purpose, it has no further purpose. So there's no reason to cling to it or to hold on to it. And it arises from the needs and confusions of people and living beings. It doesn't arise sort of outside the realm of human experience. And that's why later he'll say, if he hasn't said already, the sutras and the 12 divisions of canon all come about because of people and because of people's wisdom nature. So there's two things here. The wisdom nature, the ability to see whole and complete and awaken, that's there. And therefore, the text would then be catalyst for tapping into that. If that wasn't there, the teachings would have no effect. It'd be like water on a ground without seeds. Unless those seeds are there, the water doesn't do anything. It's just water on dirt. But because the seeds are there, then there's a potential. And then the water, say it's the Dharma, comes because the way that people lose track of or distort or get confused about their nature, cover it over, is very specific to humans. And so the texts are meant to be actually the liberated techniques or medicine to specifically address the human condition. Now you can imagine, and I imagine, Dharma spoken for beings in other realms would be a different Dharma. I mean, obviously, this would not be a text for animals. And yet the Dharma, we know, is supposedly spoken in the realms, all 10 realms. So if it's spoken in all 10 realms, then the essential truth, if you want to use that word, is there, that all beings have the Buddha nature and all can become Buddha. But all beings having that nature and all beings' specific causes and conditions vary so widely across the 10 realms that the teachings must also, vary widely across the 10 realms. And so what is appropriate to a Buddha or a Bodhisattva in their teaching and transforming is not the same thing that's appropriate to a ghost or an animal or a person. And even among the realm of people, there's differences in potentials and capacities. This is very interesting. That's why, again, the text says, if the teaching is not towards the person, the situation, the capacity, and appropriate, it's not a teaching. Wow. I was telling you that, reflecting back, there was some of the forest monks, and you see this in meditators or cultivators who go into solitude, they enter deep states of meditative concentration for prolonged periods of time. And one of the things they enter are called the dhyanas, the liberations, the samadhis. And these are deep states of focused concentration. I won't go into the details of this, but it's meditative, a meditative awareness that's not beyond our reach, but what we don't usually exercise. We're usually not that concentrated, and it's about to kind of think everything around us is it. And they've gotten to a state where everything around us is not it. There's much more. And through that, they enter different states of awareness and knowing. And these also correspond, interestingly, to what are called the heavens. You know, so these realms of the heavenly, what he would call them, the heavenly realms, also are states of mind. And maybe they're not too. But in any case, so when they get into this, you'll often hear a report. I was thinking of one forest monk who very matter-of-factly in his journal wrote, today the villagers from the local place came. They weren't afraid to come and visit me, even though there's snakes and tigers and whatnot, but they really wanted to make an offering. They brought some rice and vegetables, and then they requested the Dharma. And I spoke to them for about 15 minutes before they all started to fall asleep. And I told them, be good, don't cheat on your wives and husbands, don't beat your children, don't steal from your neighbors, try not to get drunk so often, and so forth. And they were very, very happy and bowed, and and he said there was a lot for them to absorb. And they left. And then as he was meditating at night, he said, as I was sitting there, the Nagas and Maharagas, which are beings of the spirit beings from other realms, and Devas came down and requested the Dharma, and I spoke Prajna Paramita all night long until dawn. And they never tired, and they never nodded off, and they asked all kinds of questions. And he just records this matter-of-factly, that that's what went on in my 24-hour period. And so like, whoa, so Prajna Paramita is the fundamental nature of true reality is profound emptiness and so forth. That's not for the villagers. Okay, what they got was a different Dharma. Yet, both were happy, both were full, and both had something to work on. So what I'm pointing out here is, in this case, Hui Neng is going to be responding to the nature of the question that's being asked here. So that's why I want to look. What does Prefect Hui say? First he says, I often see the Sangha and the laity, the monks and nuns and the lay people reciting, and this is a translation, Amitabha Buddha, they would be reciting Omi Tofo or Namo Omi Tofo. So this is a sort of standard recitation, and it's recited over and over again. And sometimes people use beads, count, And each time they recite, and it's a kind of way of being mindful, there's 108 beads, and then they recite in a cycle of 108 times. Now I noticed the new version of beads is these little clickers that people have. They're really tiny. I can remember back in the 70s, they had the big ones that you used to use in theaters when how many people come in. But now they got them, looks like just a little space ring on your hand, and you can Nomi Topa, Nomi Topa, Nomi Topa, and it clicks and keeps record of how many you recited, up to I don't know how many. Everybody? I just... 9,999, then it goes back to 0? Goes back to 1. Oh, okay. Doesn't go back to 0. Well, I was thinking that's very profound. It goes back to the 0, which is where it should go, but that's okay. I was metaphysical there. So they can use those counters. I said this in one class, and I said, everybody know what I'm talking about? 5 people held up their hands with their magic, counter rings on. So anyhow, I'm not making fun. I'm just saying it's a way of getting your mind into a groove of concentration, reciting the name. So he says, I've seen them reciting, hoping to be born in the West. Now the West here is referring to it's called the Western Pure Land. Okay, so sometimes it's just called the Pure Land, sometimes it's called the West, but the technical, and that's why in brackets we put the Pure Land, it's not hoping to be born in California. Okay, so it's not like that West. It's the Western Pure Land. Okay, please explain this for me. Now he's asking for an explanation. 2 questions. One question. Will they actually gain rebirth there? Please resolve my doubts. It seems as if, first of all, if it's saying, please resolve my doubts, he's implying, come on, does that really work? You see, the first question is, will they actually gain rebirth there? He could have stopped there. But he says, please resolve my doubts. So it's like the question is a question, but it's also a doubt. So there's 2 levels of things. He wants clarification about what this thing is, but he also has doubts about its efficacy. So what is he describing here? He's not asking a question, how to cultivate this. That's not the question he's asking. He's not saying, how do you cultivate Pure Land practice? Which would be an interesting question. We always go back to this, what if they ask this question instead of that one? He's not asking that. He says, I see this behavior. What do you see? People reciting the name, hoping to be born in the West. So there's 2 things he sees only, and it's external. He sees this external recitation, and he knows that they say, and if he asks, why are you doing this? I want to be born in the Western Pure Land. Now, you see it's interesting here. Reborn. Reborn, not born, reborn. So behind this is, one does it, obviously, recites it, and then the hope or the wish is this will result after death in another birth in this Pure Land. But it isn't presented as something that happens here and now. Okay? So there's layers here in this question. There's the idea of rebirth, the idea of reciting and what that means, and the idea or the question about efficacy. Will this really result in rebirth? Now he's not asking, which some people read into this, does the Pure Land actually exist? I don't see that in his question, although you might say if you're really kind of devious, it's implied there, because if he said, does this really gain rebirth there, could imply, is there a there? But it doesn't seem like on its face that's the question. Now, the master is going to respond to this question. He's not going to respond to the questions that aren't asked, but he's only going to respond to this question. So this is in reading his answer, I wouldn't go much further than saying he is talking to this person and this person's specific question, rather than making some general discourse about the Pure Land. You see? So the question to me isn't, is there a Pure Land or not? I think that's not on the table of this thing. It's, does this thing work? Seems to be the question. Is this what they're doing work? So it's a pragmatic question primarily. And he says in his answer, I will explain it for you. I will try to resolve your doubts. World honor one is talking about the Buddha. The city of Shravasti is the setting of the teaching on the Pure Land text. These are called the Pure Land Sutras, and there's 3 versions. There's a very short version, the one that gets recited, I think, here every other day. It's part of the daily ritual of devotion. I don't know, how long does it take to recite it? 10, 15 minutes. So it's a very simple, straightforward text called the Pure Land Sutra. There's a longer Pure Land Sutra, which is really interesting, and I'll bring excerpts as we go into this maybe next week. You'll see some of the more detail of this. It's got passages that are just mind-blowing, describing the realm of people and what people do in a non-Pure Land way. It's one of the kind of the best descriptions of the human condition that I've seen, but it's not in the shorter one. And so Shravasti is a city where this text was initially discoursed on, or the teaching was given by the Buddha. And it was said to be the city of Shravasti in a grove called the Jeta Grove. So it was an outdoor setting. The Jeta Grove was an offering to the Buddha and his followers at this time. They gathered there, and the Buddha then gave this teaching. And it says, then, at that time there, he taught about the Western land as an inducement to practice. Okay, first line here. As an inducement to practice. Now, what does inducement mean? The word inducement.
Carrot being dangled.
A carrot, okay. The answer is a carrot being dangled in front. And what would be the purpose of dangling a carrot in front?
To get a person's attention there instead of somewhere else and lead them to a goal.
Okay, that's not a bad, that's a graphic. Usually it's a motive or a consideration that you throw out, or a motive you instill or you activate that leads someone to action. It's not an end in itself. As the word implies, inducere from the Latin, ducere from like duct, that's where duck, not duck, quack, quack, but duck, a conduit, right? A duck into. So it's something that leads into. It's a leading into. It's a motive or considerations that leads one to action, or better, to additional or more effective actions. Now this is interesting. So it's not just leading you to action, but leading you to action that's more effective than what you're doing. So you might be doing something that is quasi-effective or kind of leaning there, but this gets you to really be precise and on top of what would lead there. Okay, so that's what inducement means. So in a sense, the reason this is important is you say, oh, the Buddha spoke of this Pure Land as a trick. It was just to trick people, to give them some kind of thing to hope for that really didn't exist. Then they wouldn't use the word here, the inducement. Okay, so this is the difference. It's not a trick where there's nothing at the end of there is no, it's a plastic carrot, okay? Or it's a real carrot, but maybe the carrot isn't the goal. The carrot is to get you to see what's beyond the carrot. But inducement has that idea. Inducement is not deception, okay? It's not deception. It's actually a clarification, a reorienting of action and intention, and maybe deepening and clarifying motivation. For example, you might say somebody comes and wants to be a physician. You say, that could be good. Why do you want to be a physician? Because I see a lot of the physicians I know drive Maseratis. Well, then you might want to say, okay, I don't want you to leave being a physician, but let me sort of show you this thing on Doctors Without Borders. Let me read you the life of Albert Schweitzer, who went into Africa and set up a clinic there, leaving the prosperous German background he had to treat people who wouldn't get medical care. And so as an inducement to this, you gradually take this student, but you keep moving the motivation to something more maybe altruistic rather than self-centered, that kind of idea. And of course, there's many stories. The one that I know personally is one of my teachers, which is interesting. I just got a picture someone gave me. And this is a picture. You see? Isn't that nice? Everybody see that? No, of course you can't see that. But in the picture, there's Master Hui Neng, the one who lived to be 119, 120. And he's sitting there with some of his disciples. This is in China. But on his right-hand side, I was looking at it, it's like, because Heng Shui gave me this picture, somebody left it as a gift. Because in a sense, we're third generation of Hui Neng, since Hui Neng was one of the certifiers of my teacher and so forth. But on his right there, sitting there, is a monk called Haidong, ocean lamp. So I was like, oh yeah, so I study with him too. Now, I'm starting to feel old when I look at this picture, and it's like old black and white. I'm thinking, wow, I studied with this guy sitting next to him. Okay, but he's really young here, the guy sitting next to him, so I'm not that old. But Haidong came to his teachers in the Sangha primarily to concentrate and focus his mind, but his goal was to take revenge for the killing of his parents. And at this time, the monasteries in China were also places where you could really learn Kung Fu. I mean, you could really learn the real thing. Shaolin was really Shaolin. It wasn't, Hollywood Shaolin like now. And so Haidong was going from place to place where he could learn both the discipline of training his body in the monastic sense, but also primarily to learn the Kung Fu necessarily to kill and take revenge on those bandits who had killed his parents. He was small. Haidong was very small. He came up to maybe here on me. And so he wasn't like an awesome brute, but his Kung Fu was, was awesome. But the monk, the one monk that really transformed him was one of his last teachers who had a very refined martial arts skill. Neigong, it's called internal skill. So it doesn't depend on external muscle and brawn, but it's using the qi as a strength element. Now, this may sound mystical to you, but having seen it actually work, I know it does. I don't have that. I tried to get it. I studied with him, but it's hard to acquire. Anyway, he had it. I can remember during just one training, these canvas bags, these big canvas bags used for punching bags, right? That thick canvas, and this was filled with sand. And at first, I would watch him doing his practices, and I was used to the kind of Bruce Lee stuff. Yeah, woo. And Master Haidong was out there, and just, going, what is this? And then he must have known I was having some doubts, and he just turned, he took his two fingers like this to the bag, and the sand just dribbled out. It's like, whoa. And I went to the bag, and nothing going on here. So his last teacher then basically took him deeply into the notion of karma and cause and effect, and by getting revenge, he was only perpetuating the cycle of harming, killing, and so forth and whatnot. And when he understood that, he actually then gave up this vow for revenge that he'd had. So you could say, in a sense, his teachers used the inducement of martial arts to bring him into a more refined practice and understanding. They didn't turn him away. So that's how I see sort of inducement here, as inducement to practice. Now the question is, to practice what? The text of the sutra clearly states, it is not far from here. Now, in the text it says, there is a land, the western land of pure, and how far away is it? Okay? So immediately you think, how far away is it? Is it miles? Is it li? Li? Li are Chinese miles, right? Is a Chinese mile shorter or longer than a Western mile? Shorter. It's like a kilometer? Because a kilometer is shorter than a mile, right? Okay, kilometers, li, miles. Is it light years? Where is this west? How far away is it? And of course, the text says, in discussing this, it might appear to be 108,000. Now, 108,000 is not exactly Google, Earth figuring out Pure Land 108. No, this is talking about a measure of miles. It's just an arbitrary thing put down. Is it that way? Is it like that distance away? Which to somebody at that time in Shrivasti, 108,000 miles was a long, long ways away. Okay? I don't, the distance between here and the sun is 93 million miles, right? Something. Huh? Yeah, so 108 is a couple times around the Earth? Oh, okay. That's for the average person in Shrivasti who did not have Prius or Volkswagen or jets or anything. 108 miles was really, really a long ways. But it was just to indicate, is it a geographical? And that's why he says in discussing this, it might appear, but it just means, and the text says not far from here. It means it's immediately available. It means, and then he goes, he really jumps here. He says the 10 evils and 8 wrongs are right within ourselves. What? Now, something's missing here, right? I mean, in terms of the narrative, you'd say, it's not far from here in discussing this might appear to be 100 miles away, but it means, whoa, 10 evils, 8 wrongs are right within ourselves. So somehow, the Western Pure Land is located in the 10 evils and the 10 evils and the 8 wrongs within ourselves. That's why it says it's not far from here. Now, how could the Western Pure Land be the 10 evils and 8 wrongs within ourselves? Obviously it can't, or it wouldn't be a Pure Land, right? Because you see the footnote below, or don't. Huh. I thought we had that someplace, the 10 evils, 8 wrongs. Next page? Oh, good, thank you. Yeah, so I don't have to explain it. The 10 good deeds are these. And then the 8 wrongs. There we go, ba xie. Okay, so basically, it's just talking about things that are available to the human. Goodness, evil, and conducting ourselves in wholesome ways. It's just basically saying, in a sense, the Pure Land is your intrinsic goodness. And if you don't cultivate that, it's very, very far away. So right away, he's locating the Pure Land within the human, within our person, within our own being, and not outside. That's where he jumped here. That was a very quick jump, but that's, I think, the only conclusion you can make from where he goes here. Describing it as distant, he said, is meant for those with limited capacity, saying it's nearby as those for greater ability. Now, this is a theme that continues out throughout the text. He says, to people of greater ability, I say, why don't you right now realize your true intrinsic Buddha? Why don't you wake up right now while you're sitting there? To people who have that potential for that direct teaching, they can hear it and they can begin to turn and really cultivate. But for other people, it's like, huh? What are you talking about? So the indirect, or what he would call the gradual teaching, is to move to more staged ways of approaching this, and talk about it as if maybe it's far away, or maybe it's something you gradually move to. And maybe by accumulating this and that, you build a foundation for this. So that to them, they'd say, again, sort of like the monk with the villagers, be good, don't do any evil, don't cheat, try to hold the 5 precepts, no killing, no stealing, refrain from sexual misconduct, don't lie and cheat, and don't get stoned or drunk. Okay, he's not saying that to the Devas and Margas. Obviously, that's been their base for a long time. So he might say, do not even have a subtle view that there's something to attain, even in prajna paramita. Well, that's pretty direct and profound. So it depends. When he's saying capacities here, he's not doing it in a judgmental way. Please don't see this as, oh, he's saying some people are dummies and other people are smart. What he's saying is everybody has a different capacity. It's a descriptive passage, not a judgmental one. He's just simply saying, as you would in any medical book, if a patient comes in with these symptoms, then they get this kind of medicine. If they come in with these kinds of symptoms, this medicine's appropriate. It's not saying one's better or worse, it's saying what's appropriate. So here he's just saying, those with limited capacities, you give limited teachings that they can get a handle on as inducements to further. Okay, this is the key. And those who have greater capacities, you still give maybe more direct, profound teachings, but those too are inducements. This is the trick here, because they're all inducements. Later, in a wonderful talk by Xu Yun in Shanghai, he basically says, every teaching, every Dharma door is an expedient, upaya, it's an inducement. Because the nature is whole and complete, because we have it all along, there's nothing really to do except, he says, realize that, and then it's okay. So he says, it's like, why don't you just kind of tune into your Buddhahood? You go, yeah, why not? Bang, I'm here, good, all done. And he says, because people have gotten so lost and twisted, you have to come up with things to sort of help them get back to that because it's not obvious anymore to them. Therefore, all the teaching methods and all the practices are set up: bowing, recitation, memorization, sitting in meditation, and so forth. Nianfu, all of these are inducements to get that entanglement disentangled, okay? So here, all he's saying is whatever's appropriate, that's what he teaches. This one, particularly, was some inducement with those with certain abilities. Now, the interesting thing he says here is that for those with limited abilities, it's seen or presented as being distant, further away, maybe even in a further rebirth, because they despair that they could here and now within their own lives really rectify themselves enough to be able to taste of that. But he doesn't want to abandon hope. For those with clear abilities, you'll see he's going to say it's not far at all. In fact, you're sitting on it. You are right now at the door of the Pure Land. How come you can't enter? So now he's back to where he was with the other thing. You are, in fact, Buddhas. How come you're not realizing it right now as we sit here? Let's go on. There are two kinds of people, not two kinds of dharma. Awakening and confusion differ only because discerning may be quick or slow. Deluded people recite the Buddha's name seeking rebirth elsewhere. Awakened people purify their own minds. That is why the Buddha said, as the mind is purified, the Buddha land is purified. So now he takes it to another dimension. He says, people differ, the Dharma is the same. Awakening and confusion are the only differences. And discerning may be quick or slow. So it's just describing different people and different abilities rather than different dharmas. So he's saying, in a sense, what I hear him saying is this Pure Land teaching is dharma. How you understand it and how you discern its meaning depends on your ability. You may see it as distant, far away, other power coming to save me. Or you may see it close at hand, getting rid of my own intrinsic greed, anger, and stupidity, and that's the door to the Pure Land. But he doesn't deny that there is a Pure Land. This is what's interesting. This is very, very, it's like there is a Pure Land, but how you get there is the question. And then he says this, the quick ones, the awakened people, the people that are awakening, purify their own minds. Now this is in contrast to reciting hoping to be. If you recite hoping to be, your energy, your effort is reaching out to say, please you, Amitabha, do this for me. Take me in. Put me on that boat, or whatever. He's saying here, if you really get it, you're not focusing on that. You say, what do I need to do to purify my own mind? So your whole effort and your whole energy goes there. And then the line, as the mind is purified, the Buddha land is purified. Now there's the linkage. The gateway to the Pure Land is a pure mind. Whoa, wait a minute. So it's like, it's not that Amitabha is coming necessarily to take you, as much as it is you need to reach out and extend your consciousness into that space, and the Pure Land manifests within the extension of that consciousness. So here it's self-transformative. It's this power, what they call zili, self-power, not tali, other power. However, in this text too, it represents that when you do self-power to the ultimate point, it is indistinguishable from other power. Other power and self-power are one and the same. Whoa. Okay? So I know it's a stretch, but this is where it's going. Sir, oh, even if a person of the East is blameless. Now, the East is not the East Coast, okay? That wasn't the West Coast, the East. The East means this land that we think we're in. Even if they're blameless, if he or she simply purifies the mind, then they're in the Pure Land. In other words, even if you're here now, if you purify the mind, you are in the Pure Land. Blameless is just talking about they're not committing any karma that generates negative return. So everything you do, you think, you say, is really right on. That's the Pure Land. So he's saying that you don't have to go anywhere. However, this is wonderful, even if a person in the West is at fault, his mind is not pure. So West means even in the Pure Land, if your mind is faulty, you're not there. Wow. When a person of the East goes wrong, he recites the Buddha's name, hoping for rebirth in the West. But when a person of the West does wrong, in what country could he seek to be reborn by reciting the Buddha's name? So he's really, truly just bringing this down to the mind and cultivating the mind. Ordinary deluded people, unaware of their essential nature, do not realize the Pure Land is within themselves. So they long to be reborn in the East, and they long to be reborn in the West. And here's this wonderful line: to the enlightened person, all places are the same. And then, as the Buddha said, no matter where you are always happy and at ease. So always happy and at ease is, in fact, one of the chief characteristics of the description of the Western Pure Land. And what he's saying is, this Western Pure Land is a state of mind and a place of purification, of insight, of understanding, of natural compassion. All the qualities and virtues are manifest and radiant with you, and then that means that is the Western Pure Land. It's not a place far away. And the other line that's really interesting, I keep coming back to the awakened person, all places are the same. Meaning that when you are in this state of mind, your very understanding and perception of the world around you is different. Now, this doesn't mean you have on some Amitabha rosy glasses and everything looks like Disneyland. It means you actually see things as they really are. It's not like saying a war zone, and a birthday party are the same. They're all places are the same. There's something fundamentally going on here that's saying about you in those places, because you don't attach or grasp, you found a happiness and peace that doesn't depend on these shifting. Therefore, all places are the same, and in any place you are not apart from that space. It doesn't mean you're not in that space, but you're not moved by that space. That's a very different, because we don't want to get this sort of thinking that they get into this zone and like no matter where they are, it's like, oh, everything's just, no. They're very keenly aware of there's differences, but it states basically their mind and their nature is so settled, so true and unmoving, that they can be in those places and yet not be turned by that. Not be, oh, this is really happy and this is really sad, because they don't attach and grasp. Merely in the appearances, you could say, nowhere attached, everywhere engaged. It's the same idea, okay? That's what's being described here. So I know this is a stretch. So we're going to have pages to go, and we'll go into more of this next week. But I want to point out one thing, first of all. He is not really departing from these teachings. You could say, hey, he's doing some radical, reinterpretation of the Pure Land here. Actually, what he's saying is, this thing that you're describing, Prefect Wei, just reciting name, hoping to be reborn, is not enough. It really isn't Pure Land practice. You can recite the name, but are you reciting with your mouth or your heart and your mind? Remember earlier in the Prajna, he says people talk Prajna, but their mouths, they talk it, but their minds are not there at all. So he's talking about this sort of inner and outer. And hoping to be reborn is, again, putting all the emphasis on someone else doing it, rather than saying, I am doing this and I am being reborn in the act of doing this, as opposed to hoping, wishing, waiting for Godot. It's a very different sensibility. And the text, very interestingly, and I know this is, people say, well, right here in the text it says, if you recite, Amitabha will come and da-da-da. But there's always this one line in the text, even in the smaller sutra. You're going, there's a land, western land, bliss, and there's flowers, and you describe it, there's flowers and these birds that sing, and after lunch everybody strolls around, and not a negative word is heard by the people passing by, like it's, ain't no lions and tigers, ain't no mumbo snakes, just sweet watermelon and buckwheat cakes, It's described that way, and then you go, oh, but there's this one little line, it says, Ishin Bulan. What? Ishin Bulan. If you can recite Amitabha's name, people go, Amitabha, what? Ishin Bulan, what does that mean? One thought unconfused. If you can try, and the larger text, all the text, have that little line seemingly buried in there, I would say they should bold it and highlight it, because it's the most important component. Yes, all of this is possible, but then there's that one little caveat. One thing you have to do, you have to single-minded, sincerely recite with no other thoughts. One thought without confusion, without turbidity. Thought after thought unconfused, thought after thought is a Pure Land. One thought unconfused, one thought is a Pure Land. Next thought confused, no longer the Pure Land. Oh, you're saying, wait a minute, is that, yeah, it's there, believe me. Go back and look at the text, and you go and you see that line occurring again and again and again. It's called Ishin Bulan. This is what he means by the single practice samadhi. His single practice samadhi, it's called the Yixing Sanmei, is basically Pure Land practice. But it means you're in that state of non-turbidity, walking, standing, sitting down, and even sleeping. 24/7, no matter where you are, you're mindful. Mindful? Mindful of? Your mind is full of this. It doesn't mean, oh, I'm recollecting. Mindful doesn't mean I kind of recollect, be mindful of something. Like, no. Mindful means the mind is full of this purity, of this unconfused state. Your mind is full. And when the mind is full, that is, in fact, the Pure Land. It's not like it's something you get. So this is not so much you get the Pure Land because you do this. It is because you do this, it is the Pure Land. It's very different. And so it's not so much the name that's being recited, because this is used also for Earth Store and for Guanyin. You can do Namo Dizang Wangpusa, Earth Store Bodhisattva, you can Namo Guanchi Pusa, Namo Amitofo. Okay? It's the same basic practice. But it's the power of the efficaciousness is not in the name being recited, it's in the reciter of the name. Now, who would that be? Well, that would be me. And so, the Pure Land, the Bodhimanda, is not some imaginary far distant place. It's the here and now and how you're doing. Here and now, present, reciting, clear, is Pure Land, it's Bodhi, it's Prajna, and not. So, I would encourage you to relook at the texts that support this practice really carefully. Look at the longer Amitabha Sutra. And it's not to say that reciting the Buddha's name is wrong or bad or anything, but it's just saying you really have to understand how to recite it in order for there to be efficaciousness in this practice. But to simply recite, he's saying reciting mouth, hoping for rebirth, the first question, the Sixth Patriarch saying, not sufficient. Might be okay. It's better than going out and robbing and stealing and pillaging and raping, because you're in the hall reciting, and that's better than those, but that's still not the Pure Land. Okay, so I'll give you two quick stories to explain this, because this is the Pure Land that the monk Haidung, remember I showed you the picture? That's what he taught me, and then Shuyan taught, Hanshan taught, my teacher taught. And if you look at their kaishas, their explanations of Pure Land teachings, especially Hanshan's, very clear. He's teaching Mind Ground Dharma Pure Land, this teaching. So we were in an assembly once, and we were doing one of these sessions, and this is a 7-day session. So you start, and you do 7 days. In fact, we just did it this week, a little practice of it. You do 7 days where you bow 3 times, and then somebody uses a bell and fish, and you circumambulate just reciting Namo Amitofo, Namo Amitofo, in a very slow, rhythmic, just like an even flowing river. And you lose yourself in that river. You immerse yourself in that river. And your eyes are only watching the feet of the person in front of you. And for that week, it's 7 days, you put your iPhone, your iPad, all these technical aside. You get to a point where you know, is it Monday or Wednesday? Is it morning, afternoon? You don't know. You just lose yourself, and this is the expedient beginning of getting into the Pure Land Samadhi. And then as you do that, you do it for 7 days. For half an hour, you walk and recite. Then they, I think, they hit the fish. You sit down in meditation and recite aloud together for half an hour. And then they stop and you just sit for half an hour silent, letting the recitation go on inside of you. And then at the half an hour, you get up again, circumambulate reciting, sit silent. And you do this usually from about 6 in the morning till 9 at night. And then you get some rest, get up in the morning, and you start again. What this does is it gives you a taste of the Ishin Bulan. Now, are you Ishin Bulan during that time? Of course not. Because as you do it, you realize that the mind is like this mad monkey that wants to run all over the place. But by reciting the Buddha's name, you get to see why you're not in the Pure Land. And it's not like Amitabha bailed or didn't fulfill. You can see that your mind, getting to Ishin Bulan is really tricky. Something simple, I mean, I was sort of in a kind of Pure Land Samadhi, and I was sitting there in the hall reciting, and I got into it, I really got into it, and I was, whatever that means. And then they bring in the meal offering to put on the altar, so they make a little meal offering on the altar before lunch. And I have a real weakness for jiaozi. These are these Chinese dumplings, right? And someone came through with a steaming plate of jiaozi to put them on the altar and said, Ami tofu, whoosh. Oh, I left the Pure Land so fast for the jiaozi land, and it was like, it was embarrassing. Oh my God, is that all the samadhi power I have? Whoa. And then it was worse, because there was only an offering, and I was a layperson at the time, and the monks and nuns get to eat first. So you're standing in line, and there's this whole thing of jiaozi. You're supposed to be, well, you're eating, omi tofu, and I'm watching. Oh my God, she took 6, he took 5. When I get there, there's going to be no jiaozi, and it's not even going to be hell. Forget the Pure Land. But in that exchange, I got to see, oh, so that's where your mind is. What Pure Land do you think you're going to be reborn in? When you're in jiaozi samadhi. So, but in the course of that, one of the questions that came up from a young monk asked the teacher, Master, is the Pure Land a real place or is it a state of mind? And the teacher just smiled and said, yes. And then the second session, that same person, he was from Britain and he was very clever. And so he was doubting then. He said, but it says Amitabha made these vows, and if these vows are so powerful, and he's a Buddha, and he's got all this power, why didn't he just, like that, he said, and take us off to be reborn in the Pure Land? Why do we have to sit here and recite like this? Because he made the vow, right? And he should be all powerful. Can he do that? And the master smiled, and he said, he probably could. And he said, well, why doesn't he? He said, because as soon as you're reborn there, you'd have one of your polluted thoughts and you'd be back in this land. And I was just like, oh, wait a minute, what's going on here? So you could see that even in these exchanges, this mind ground teaching weaves through what the Sixth Patriarch is talking about, it's what the text talks about, and it's what the teachers of this tradition talk about. I mean, they have ways of stating it again and again, but it always comes back to, this is the Pure Land. You are the gate to the Pure Land. Now, interestingly, in the part that comes up, he actually does this. He actually relocates the Pure Land within the body of our own bodies and stuff. So that's the next passage we'll get into next week, I guess. So I went over. I apologize. Any announcements? Everybody who announces is gone. That means there was something to announce, they didn't announce, and they're all out having a good time someplace. I know that tomorrow is the regular schedule. There should be an avatamsical lecture tomorrow night. There's some visiting monks coming from China or in transit, and they're going to be here probably on Saturday and Sunday for a while. Then they're going up to the Seat of 10,000 Buddhas. And then there's a whole contingent going to Salt Lake City, Utah for the Parliament of World Religions. I don't know which one this is, the 5th or 6th. Anybody know? The first one was in 1893, so They didn't have another one really till 1993, 100 years later. I won't go into the reasons for that, but this one's taking place in Salt Lake City. How many people here are going to that? Come on, show of hands. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Quite a few people I know from my classes will be going. It's 5, 6 days? 4 or 5 days.
The entire group from DRV is 76 people or something.
Yeah, just say a word. What is this Parliament of World Religions? You? You're going. I assume you know where you're going, so say something about it. Now, believe it or not, because there's prohibitions about drinking in the Mormon tradition, the substitute for that, this is off the record, the substitute for that, because I know it is there, is ice cream. So if you're going to Salt Lake City, you're going to find ice cream that's out of this world. There's a lot of ice cream shops. So is that why you're going, or? Huh? Ice cream samadhi, that's right. Until it falls off the cone and melts them all. Then it's back to the hills. So what's going on? What's the Parliament?
Well, it's the Parliament of World Religions. So, is it on? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I really have to admit I've been really busy and haven't really looked at the schedule, but there's lots of events and workshops by...
Who's going to be there? Let's start. What a parliament means to speak.
I know
The
that
world
Dalai
religions
Lama,
are speaking.
I know that Dalai Lama actually cancelled because he's sick. Jane Goodall is going to be there. Or Desmond Tutu.
Desmond
Bishop
Tutu. Jane Goodall.
Yeah.
Okay. Karen Armstrong.
Karen Armstrong.
Is usually the Dalai Lama makes an appearance? I don't know if the Dalai Lama is coming this
No,
time.
he cancelled because he's sick.
Okay.
He's staying in India in October.
So usually, some of the key figures from all the world's leading religious traditions gather, and including people who are spiritually inclined and involved with all sorts of religion, both religion as the interior life and religion as the engaged exterior, and all variations between, with their practices, with their devotional, with their philosophies and whatnot, and it's like a huge exchange. It's not like a mall where you go and sample, and choose and pick, but a dialogue begins to occur in that gathering. The idea is if the religions of the world can in some sense get together on a common platform and get along, there's a possibility that that could extend to the larger world. The converse would be equally true. If the religions cannot find common ground to get along, it's hard to expect their followers and their average carrying on to get along.
Is there a particular topic for this session?
What is the focus this time?
I think women.
Women?
That's a good
Okay. Sometimes they focus on the environment, sometimes it's on religious practice, sometimes it's on peace and conflict. But even though that's a topic, there's going to be a number of workshops going along these lines. Hung Sure is joining up with this monk to talk about meditation in the modern world, that they're leading a workshop. There's all kinds of food things because they're sharing their food, so there's all sorts of different vegetarian stuff going on. It's pretty rich. But one of the things behind it is there is some realization back in 1893 already that drove the first one that's driving all of these, is that even at that time, much of the conflict, the violence and bloodshed in the world was being driven by a rationale of religious, right? It wasn't saying religion was doing this, but people were using religion to justify incredible conflict that is not gone from the scene. And so one of the themes here is to address that and kind of diffuse that kind of strident ideological misinterpretation of the teachings. And so Houston Smith went a number of times. He started at the World Religions of a whole panel and element of indigenous peoples. So before it was the major world religions, and Houston got into the idea of taking the non-represented, which would be the more indigenous religions of that aren't officially in world religions, and brought that, and it went back to his experience with Native Americans when he was in Syracuse, New York. So it's a very interesting story, but he's one of the figures that was really prominent in bringing this together. So there's going to be quite a bit going on. And there's a whole, we got 70 or 80 people going from our group. I think at this late date, good luck on trying to find a place to stay. I don't know if it'd be broadcast even. Are they going to stream some of this, or?
This is the first problem they're going to stream some online.
Oh, okay. So if you wanted to check in there and you knew how to do this, you could just go and see what's happening online. There'll probably be another one in 3 or 4 years, continuing, but that's the only announcement. And maybe people are getting ready tonight to go. Yes?
I was going to mention Master Hui Neng and lecturing tomorrow, I'm sure.
Here.
Yeah.
So tomorrow's lecture will be this monk from China and Hangzhou giving a joint lecture here on Saturday night, probably instead of the Avatamska. So.
And he's a graduate from Beijing University. I think he left home maybe 91 or 92, so one of the first graduate from Beijing. Well, in that early 90s or late 80s, religion was pretty much forbidden. So he had to kind of hit his Buddhist sutra or something under the table. He couldn't even carry his reciting beads. He would be probably kicked out of school if he had the reciting bead on his hand. And then he read the Master Hua's, I think, Sixth Patriarch Sutra and the 3-step one bow. And he decided to leave home. Yeah.
One of the reasons sutras are sometimes carved on rocks is because they can easily disappear during, what you would say, persecutions. And early on, the teachings were memorized and held in memory. And a side note of that is, if you read, I mentioned Fahrenheit 451. The ending of Fahrenheit 451 is all the humanistic literature, philosophy, religious books of the world are burned. But these professors now, who have nothing to do because they don't teach that in the university anymore, are wandering. They're sort of vagabonds wandering, and each one has memorized a text. So when they gather around the fire, somebody says, they don't even use their names anymore. Somebody says, oh, that's Plato, that's Nietzsche, he's Shakespeare's sonnets, this is the Old Testament. And, and then they have it all memorized. And so the way of carrying it on is to carry it on in their memory, but the idea is sometime when the conditions are ripe, these teachings can come forth again. Not unlike some of the things surrounding these traditions when you say they hide it away. One way of hiding it away is to memorize it. But anyhow, I digress. It's time to transfer.
Hey, Marty, people online are still waiting for those promised stories.
Sorry, it's breaking up. What did you say? May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate